Some men are born fighters. Others are born cowards. Life doesn't give you a choice which one you are. It just tests you until you prove it. My name is Finn Grant. I'm 55 years old. Built my own construction business with my own hands, and I've built half this town too. Grew up in Coleridge, West Virginia, spent time in the military, came back to take care of family, and never left. Not much for words, but folks here know I get things done. Coleridge isn't big. You can walk Main Street in 10 minutes, past the barber shop, the diner, the bank. People know each other. Reputation matters. A man's name is only as good as his actions. That's why, when a buddy of mine from Charleston called and told me what he saw, I knew the weight of his words before he even said them. Finn, he said, voice low like he hated to be the one telling me. Hate to bring this to you, but I figured you'd rather hear it from me than someone else. That's never a good start. I set my coffee down, bracing for it. Go on. Eden. She's been meeting some guy at the Hilton off I-64. Same guy. More than once. It didn't hit like a gut punch. I wasn't some fool who thought my life was a fairy tale. I just let his words settle, quiet. You sure? Yeah. A pause. It's Mark Miller. That got my attention. I didn't react, but I felt something coil inside me, slow and tight. Mark Miller. I knew that name. We'd gone to high school together. He was the type that liked to talk big and laugh louder, always working some angle, never doing anything straight up. He was the kind of guy who greased palms, smoothed over problems with smiles and handshakes, and left other people holding the bag. I let out a slow breath. All right. That's all you're gonna say? What else is there? Another pause. Just figured you'd want to know. I appreciate it. I hung up and sat there for a while, watching the steam rise from my coffee. Some men yell. Some drink. Some punch walls. I wasn't raised that way. If a problem needed fixing, you worked it out with a level head and a steady hand. I started paying attention. Eden worked in corporate real estate, traveled now and then, always professional, always polished. The kind of woman who had schedules for everything, appointments, workouts, even family time. She was good at keeping things running smooth. Too smooth, maybe. I hadn't noticed it before, but looking at it now, there were gaps. Business trips that didn't quite add up. Moments where her phone buzzed and she turned away just a little too quick. I didn't confront her. That wasn't my way. First, I needed to be sure. I called up Walter Grady at the courthouse. He was a tired man in his 60s, been pushing paperwork for half his life. Kept his head down, never cared much for gossip. But he knew things. Finn, he said when I stepped into his office. You finally getting that business expansion sorted? Not today. I leaned on the counter. Got a question for you. He adjusted his glasses, looking at me over the rim. That's so? You ever seen Mark Miller's name pop up in any recent filings? Walter frowned, thumbing through a stack of papers like he already knew what he was looking for. Yeah, actually. Some real estate dealings, financing some properties up in Charleston. Got his name tied to a couple high-risk projects. Looks like he's got a lot of money moving around. Interesting. Mark had always been a gambler, but he never played with his own money. I thanked Walter and left, the pieces starting to fit together. That night, Eden came home late. She walked in, heels clicking against the hardwood, smelling like expensive perfume and city air. She gave me the usual nod, the kind a person gives when they're passing a co-worker in the hall, not their husband in their own home. Long day? I asked, not looking up from the invoices I was reviewing. She let out a tired breath. Meetings ran over. I hummed. Charleston again? She hesitated just a second too long. Yeah. I didn't push. I just watched as she set her purse down, checked her phone, then disappeared upstairs without another word. The next morning, I made a call to Tristan Fisher. He was a real estate agent, flashy suit, always trying to talk bigger than his britches. Desperate to close deals. If anyone had insight on Mark's business, it'd be him. Finn, my man. Tristan answered, voice full of that fake enthusiasm salesman use. What can I do for you? Heard you're handling some high-dollar deals. Thought maybe I'd be interested. There was a pause, like he didn't quite buy it. Yeah? What kind of investment you thinking? Something solid. Something safe. Tristan chuckled. That's not Miller's style. That's so. Guy's always chasing the next big thing. Has a project he's been pushing hard, boutique hotel, high-end retail, the works. But you know how these things go. High risk, high reward, or high loss. I smirked. That's so. I let Tristan talk himself into a corner, spilling all the details he thought might get him a sale. By the time I hung up, I had enough to know exactly how I was going to handle this. See, some men throw punches. Some yell, some break things. Me? I preferred a slow, controlled burn. Mark Miller thought he was on top of the world. He thought he could waltz into my life, take what was mine, and walk away clean. He had no idea I was about to rip the ground out from under him. I wasn't in a rush. A man doesn't build something strong by swinging wildly. You take your time. You measure twice, cut once. I spent the next few weeks making sure every piece was in place before I made my move. Eden kept up her routine like nothing had changed. Early morning coffee, out the door by 7, phone in hand, never asking much about my day. I let her be. Let her get comfortable. Let her think I was the same man I'd always been, steady, predictable, not paying attention. In the meantime, I made a few adjustments. Called up an old friend in Charleston who worked in corporate networking, asked him to slip Mark Miller's name into a few conversations. Nothing direct, just enough to make it sound like there were better opportunities out there for a man of his talents. The kind that required relocation. It wasn't long before Mark started getting phone calls from out of state, offers just good enough to catch his interest. Tristan, the real estate guy, was easy enough to nudge. Told him I had some interest in properties around town, hinted at some partnerships. He practically salivated at the thought of tying my name to his deals, and before long, he was pushing Mark toward investments I knew damn well were going nowhere. By the time Eden left for another business trip, meetings in Charleston, might be late, same line as always. I was ready. I followed, keeping my distance, watching as she pulled into the Hilton parking lot, same as before. She walked in with purpose, head high, dressed sharp. That's Eden. Always in control. Always careful. But not careful enough. Mark showed up 20 minutes later. A dark suit, cocky stride, handshake with the valet like they were old pals. He walked in like he owned the place. I parked across the street, settled in, and waited. I wasn't here to confront them, not yet. I was here to confirm everything. To make sure when I made my move, there wouldn't be any room for doubt. 2 hours later, they left together. Eden looked relaxed, laughing at something he said. Mark had that same smug confidence he'd always carried, like the world existed just to serve him. I let them go. No need to rush. I already had what I needed. The next morning, I was back in Coleridge, sitting at the gym, wrapping my hands before a round on the heavy bag. Charles O'Brien, my workout partner, a man who'd been through hell and clawed his way back, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. So, you finally gonna handle it? I exhaled through my nose, flexing my fingers. Already am. He nodded, watching me. Not gonna lie, I half expected you to lose your shit and put that guy through a wall. I glanced at him, deadpan. That's not how you win a fight. Charles chuckled. Fair enough. I let the silence sit between us for a moment before I said, he's got his hands in some bad investments. I'm giving him a little push. Charles smirked. You setting him up for a fall? I didn't answer, just stepped up to the bag and threw a solid right hook. The impact shuddered through my arm, satisfying. Charles grunted. Yeah, thought so. The next few days played out exactly as I'd set them up. Tristan called Mark with what sounded like a golden opportunity, a real estate deal in Nashville, an exclusive chance to get in on the ground floor. Meanwhile, the local journalist I'd tipped off started sniffing around Mark's finances, asking the right questions, digging up the wrong answers. Eden, of course, was oblivious. She went about her routine, planning her next trip, smiling her professional smile. I watched her, the way a man watches a building before he knocks it down. Then, the final piece. A family dinner. A normal evening, just me, Eden, and the kids, Zane, 25, working his way up in the business, and Iris, 20, sharp as a knife, home for the weekend from college. Eden sat at the table, wine in hand, talking about some upcoming work event, acting like nothing was wrong. I let her finish, let the quiet settle, then set my fork down and said, You know, I heard something interesting the other day. Eden barely glanced up. Oh, yeah, I said, leaning back in my chair. Friend of mine in Charleston told me Mark Miller's been spending a lot of time at the Hilton. It was like flipping a switch. Her whole body tensed for half a second before she caught herself, forcing her expression neutral. But it was there. That moment of panic. Iris frowned, looking between us. Who's Mark Miller? An event planner, I said. One your mother knows real well. Eden set her wine down, too carefully. Finn. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. How long? She pressed her lips together, exhaling through her nose like she was weighing her words. It's complicated. Zane shifted in his seat. Jesus, Mom. Eden turned toward him. Zane, this isn't what? I cut in. Isn't what it looks like? Because what it looks like is pretty damn clear. She exhaled sharply, eyes flicking toward the kids, realizing there was no spinning this. Finn, we should talk about this privately. No, I said, standing. We should have talked about it before you decided to throw away 20 years of marriage for some two-bit con man. Her face went pale. Iris looked disgusted, pushing her chair back from the table. Zane just shook his head. Eden swallowed hard. I didn't. You did, I said flatly. And now you get to live with it. I walked out, letting her sit there in the wreckage of what she'd done. I didn't wait around to hear excuses. A man doesn't waste time arguing with someone who's already made their choices. I left Eden sitting there, her carefully built world cracking at the edges, and drove to the only place that made sense. Work. My crews had just wrapped up a roofing job over on Parker Street, a small 3-bedroom house with a solid foundation. I pulled in, parked next to the work truck, and stepped out. The air smelled like fresh-cut wood and asphalt shingles, the kind of smell that told you something was getting built right. Troy, my foreman, walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. Didn't expect to see you this late. Needed to clear my head. He nodded like he understood. A man like Troy didn't ask personal questions. He just handed me a pair of work gloves and said, we could use another set of hands finishing up the trim. That's what I needed, something real. Something I could feel under my hands. I climbed the ladder, picked up the nail gun, and got to work. The rhythm of it settled me, the weight of the wood, the way things lined up clean when you took the time to do it right. That's the thing about building. You can always see progress. You put in the effort, and something solid comes out of it. Life didn't always work that way, but I made damn sure my revenge would. By the time I got back home, it was past dark. The house was quiet. I half expected Eden to be waiting, but there was nothing. Just a single lamp left on in the living room. Her way of telling me she knew I was coming back, that she wasn't sure what to say. I walked past it, straight to the kitchen, pulled a beer from the fridge, and leaned against the counter. Footsteps on the stairs. Then her voice, careful. Finn. I didn't look up. If you're here to lie, don't bother. She hesitated, standing just outside the doorway. I wasn't going to lie. I finally met her eyes. Then what were you going to say? She sighed, arms crossed. It wasn't. I didn't plan for this. I let out a short breath, something that might have been a laugh if there was any humor left in me. That's supposed to mean something? Her jaw tightened. You haven't exactly been present, Finn. Oh, there it was. The justification. The attempt to make it my fault. I nodded, set the beer down, and crossed my arms. So that's it. I work too much. So you screw around with some guy who throws parties for a living? She flinched. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I pushed off the counter. Let me tell you something, Eden. You wanted to leave? You should have just left. You don't get to spit on our marriage and then act like it was some accident. She opened her mouth, but I was already done. I walked past her, heading upstairs, letting her stand there with whatever excuses she thought mattered. The next morning, I started closing in. Mark had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way. I made another call to Tristan, feeding him just enough information to keep Mark interested in the Nashville deal. Meanwhile, I met with my lawyer. I want everything handled quietly, I said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. She gets what she's legally entitled to, nothing more. He adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. You sure about that? You could fight for more. No need, I said. She's about to have bigger problems. By the end of the week, Mark had taken the bait. Tristan called, barely able to contain his excitement. Finn, buddy, Miller's all in. He's convinced he's about to land the biggest deal of his career. I smirked. That's so. Oh yeah, he's already making plans to relocate. Perfect. I thanked him, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. That was one problem nearly solved. The next part was making sure Eden felt the weight of her decisions. She came home late again that night, moving like she expected a fight. I didn't give her one. I just sat at the kitchen table, looking over some paperwork, waiting for her to speak first. Finally, she did. Are we really doing this? I looked up. Doing what? This, she gestured between us. Throwing everything away. I let out a slow breath, measured. I didn't throw anything away, Eden. You did. Her jaw tightened. You're just going to walk away? No, I said. I'm going to rebuild. Without you. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked upstairs. No apology. No begging. Just silence. That was fine. The only thing left now was making sure she understood exactly what she'd lost. I didn't need Eden to beg for forgiveness. I needed her to understand the consequences of her choices. The next morning, I took my time getting ready, slipping into my work boots, grabbing my gloves, and heading out to the truck. I'd made up my mind. The slow burn was over. The crew was already on site, starting to lay the foundation for a new build. I spent the morning with them, making sure everything was lined up right. No distractions. Just work. By the time noon came around, I was on the phone with my lawyer, arranging the final steps of the divorce. No messy fights. Just straight business. Everything's in place, he said. We're set to file first thing tomorrow morning. You sure about this? I'm sure, I said, glancing around the job site, seeing my men moving with purpose. I've got nothing to say to her anymore. All right, just be ready for the fallout. I'll handle it. I hung up and went back to the crew, walking the site with Troy, pointing out small adjustments to the layout. When I was working, I didn't think about much else. The smell of concrete, the rhythm of the work, the constant hum of the machinery, it kept my mind clear. By the time I finished for the day, I felt the weight of what was coming. I'd prepared for it, but you never know exactly how things will land until they do. Eden had been quiet at home, and I was fine with that. Silence was better than the bullshit we'd been spinning for months. When I walked in the door, she was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV, but not really watching. She didn't look up when I walked in. You're filing, aren't you? I didn't say anything. Just took off my boots and walked into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge. You don't have to do this, she said, still not looking at me. I opened the beer and took a long pull. You think I'm doing this to hurt you? She finally turned her head, locking eyes. You could have tried harder. I set the bottle down on the counter with a dull thud. You could have been honest. But you weren't. You chose him over everything else. I'm done trying to save something you don't care about. There it was, the moment where she realized I wasn't going to back down. The last bit of control she thought she had was slipping through her fingers. She shifted in her seat, the corners of her mouth tight, trying to keep it together. You really don't care? She asked, voice low, almost like a whisper. No, I said, straightening up. I don't. But you will. When this hits, you'll understand. The consequences don't come right away, but they catch up to you. Her eyes flared with something. Anger, frustration, maybe fear. You think you're better than me? I think I'm done with you. She stood up then, pacing the room, her hands twisting together, almost frantic. I never wanted to hurt you, Finn. This wasn't part of the plan. It was just what? I interrupted. Just an affair? Just a little fun? Is that what you're telling me? I didn't plan for any of it to go this far, she said, her voice breaking slightly. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I shook my head, wiping a hand down my face. It doesn't matter what you planned. You did it. You crossed that line. And now we're here. She paused, and for the first time, I saw her hesitate. It wasn't the first time I'd seen her falter, but it was the first time she didn't try to cover it up. The wall she'd built between us was starting to crumble, and I wasn't sticking around to watch the rest of it fall. You can keep your part of the house, I said, moving toward the door. I'll take care of the rest. The papers will be filed tomorrow. You can figure out the rest. Eden didn't say anything as I left. She just stood there, her shoulders tense. I wasn't sure if she was shocked or just too proud to admit what had happened. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I drove out to the job site again that evening, not because I needed to, but because it felt like the only place I could breathe. I stood there, looking over the foundation, watching the men work. There was a lot to do, but this was something I could control. Mark didn't know it yet, but his future was already set. His shiny new career move was about to crash and burn. He thought he could walk away with Eden, with the money, with the excitement, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I'd spent my whole life building something, and I wasn't about to let some smooth-talking event planner tear it down for a cheap thrill. I wasn't going to play dirty, but I didn't need to. I just needed him to fall into his own trap, and I knew exactly how to make that happen. The pieces were in place. All I had to do was sit back and watch him walk straight into it. I wasn't going to burn everything down in one night. I was going to do it the same way I'd always done it, slow, steady, and with a purpose. The papers were filed, and just like that, everything changed. I didn't hear from Eden for a couple of days, and that was fine by me. She needed to let it sink in. When she finally called, I didn't pick up. I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. The decision had already been made. Instead, I kept my head down, working. The crew was deep into the new build, frame-up, foundation set. Troy was running things smoothly, but I kept my eye on every detail. There's something satisfying about seeing a project come together piece by piece. The foundation is just the beginning, but it's solid. And once it's in place, the rest doesn't feel so hard. I could feel the tension around town. People were talking, of course. Word gets around in small places, even when you're not looking for it. But I didn't care. I wasn't here to win anyone's approval. I was here to finish what I'd started. That night, Eden showed up at the house again. I knew she would. They always come back when they realize they've made a mistake. She knocked on the door, soft at first, like she wasn't sure what she was walking into. I opened it. "What do you want?" Her eyes were red. She hadn't slept. I could tell that much. Her hair was pulled back, not the usual professional look. This was the version of her I hadn't seen in a long time. The one who didn't have everything under control. "You've made your point," she said, voice steady but thin. "Can we at least talk about this?" I stepped back, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. I'm done." She took a step forward, like she was trying to push through the door with her presence. "I know I messed up. I know it was wrong. But Finn, we've been together for over 20 years. I can't just—" "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "You don't get to do this. Not now. Not after everything you've done." She swallowed hard, then let out a breath, her shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I know I messed up, but I don't know what to do now." I shook my head. "I don't need your apology. It's too late for that. You're not even going to listen?" Her voice was starting to crack. I could feel a wave of frustration rising in my chest, but I kept it down. There was no point in yelling. "No, Eden. I'm not going to listen. You've already made your bed. Now you can lie in it." She stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was saying, then finally nodded. "I guess you're right." "Yeah, I am," I said, my voice quiet. "No, I've got work to do." I closed the door before she could say anything else. I wasn't going to drag this out any longer. What was done was done. She'd made her choices, and now she'd have to live with them. The next morning, I got a call from Tristan. "Finn, I gotta talk to you about something." His voice was strained, like he'd been up all night. "What's going on?" "It's about Miller. He's pulling out of the Nashville deal. All of it. He's gone into hiding." I smirked, not surprised. "You sure?" "Yeah. His name's all over the news now. Some shady dealings, investors pulling out. Everything's falling apart. Word is, he's running." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the work site. "Good. I knew it wouldn't last. I don't know what you did, but it worked. He's done." I didn't say anything for a moment. Just let the silence sit there. "All right. I'll keep you posted," Tristan said, hanging up. I sat there for a minute, thinking. I didn't have to get my hands dirty. I didn't have to break a single rule to make sure Mark lost everything. He did it all to himself. But he didn't know that. And he wouldn't know it until it was too late. I looked around at the crew working in the heat of the afternoon. They were hustling, putting in the work like they always did. Troy came over with a clipboard, a grin on his face. "Got some good news, Finn. That steel we've been waiting on? It's in." I clapped him on the back. "Good. Let's get to work." And we did. The job went on, just like it always had. One nail at a time, one board at a time, and by the end of the week, the structure was already taking shape. It was like everything else fell away when you focused on the real work, what mattered. The rest was just noise. Eden tried a few more times to reach out, but I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in hearing her regret. She'd made her decision, and now she could live with it. The more she tried to pull me back into the mess she'd created, the more I realized I was better off without it. There was no coming back from this. The only thing left to do was build. And that's exactly what I did. Every day, the work got a little more solid, a little more secure, and I knew that no matter what came next, I'd be all right. I'd always been able to rebuild. It was in my blood. By the time the foundation was set for the new project, I'd all but stopped thinking about Eden. The house was just a house now, nothing more. She wasn't coming back, and if she thought I was going to wait around for her to change her mind, she was wrong. It was over. The divorce papers were in motion, and she could try to make sense of everything on her own time. Mark Miller, on the other hand, hadn't figured out the full scope of what was coming. His world was unraveling fast, and I could feel the ripple effect. The more I heard about him, the more I realized how deep he dug himself into a hole when I had no intention of digging him out of. The news of his failed deals hit the local papers, his name plastered everywhere with stories about shady dealings, abandoned projects, and investors pulling out. His charm couldn't save him now. He was a man who thought he could outsmart everyone, but the world had a funny way of putting people like him in their place. I didn't need to lift a finger. He was digging his own grave. But I wasn't going to let Eden think she could still come back into my life when the dust settled. There was no second chance for someone who thought they could play me like that. A week after everything hit the fan, I was sitting at the local diner, a cup of coffee in front of me, when Tristan slid into the booth across from me, looking like he hadn't slept. "Miller's gone, Finn," he said, running a hand through his hair. "He's out of town, gone dark. Everyone's talking about it." I took a sip of my coffee, watching the steam rise from the mug. "Good." Tristan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You know, people are starting to put two and two together. They're saying you had something to do with it. Let them talk." I set the cup down, my gaze steady. "They won't figure it out." He shook his head, a mix of disbelief and admiration in his eyes. "You've really done it, haven't you?" I didn't answer right away. Just let the silence sit between us. "I didn't do anything, Tristan. I just let him do it to himself." He grinned, half in awe, half in something else. "Respect, maybe. I thought you were just gonna leave it, you know? But you really burned him down." "I didn't burn him," I said quietly. "I just didn't put out the fire when it started." Tristan chuckled, nodding. "Hell of a way to do it. He's done, and I gotta say, you're coming out looking pretty damn good." I shrugged, not letting it get to me. "I'm not worried about looking good. I'm worried about what's next." And what was next? Work. I spent the next few days finalizing contracts, working with the crew, making sure the next project was going to be done right. Business was steady. My name was solid in this town, and nothing would change that. I wasn't about to let anyone drag me into their mess. But Eden wasn't done. She showed up at the site, of course, like she couldn't stay away. I didn't know how she found out where I was, but there she was, walking toward me with that same tense look on her face. "You've been avoiding me," she said when she got close. I wiped my hands on a rag and didn't look up. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been busy. You know, Finn, I don't expect you to just forgive me, but you can't keep running from this." I looked up at her then, steady. "You think I'm running? You're the one who ran. You ran into the arms of a guy who's just as bad as you are." "I didn't mean for it to get out of hand," she said, her voice quieter now. "No, you didn't," I said, straightening up. "But you did it. And now you're dealing with it. You can't just come back after all this and expect me to pick up the pieces." She looked down, taking a deep breath, like she was trying to make sense of something. "I know I made mistakes, Finn. I know. But I want to fix this." I shook my head. "You don't fix something like this, Eden. You either build something new, or you walk away. You don't get both." She looked at me for a long moment, like she was trying to read something in my eyes. Then she nodded slowly, like she was finally accepting what I'd been saying all along. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said, her voice thick. I just turned and walked away, back toward the job site, letting her stand there in the dust. I wasn't looking back. I was already moving forward. A few weeks passed, and the project started to take shape. The frame went up, the walls went up, and as each day passed, I felt the weight of what had happened lift a little more. It wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about Mark or the mess they created. It was about what I was building now. Business was booming. People around town knew I had my head in the game, that I was doing what I'd always done, making something solid, something that lasted. The phone calls started coming in from other businesses, from investors looking to get in on what I was doing. I didn't have to chase it. It was just happening. I got a call from my lawyer one morning, just as I was finishing up a meeting with a subcontractor. He told me that Eden had signed the papers. It was done. She was moving out. And I didn't feel anything. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just a quiet knowing that I had done what needed to be done. I'd rebuilt my life the same way I always rebuilt everything, one piece at a time, with steady hands and a clear mind. The rest? That was her problem now. The site was buzzing with activity, the crew working in sync, every man focused on his part of the job. The building was coming together, but so was my life. The final pieces of everything were falling into place, and I didn't need to look back. The phone rang one morning while I was overseeing the installation of the roofing trusses. I glanced at the caller ID and saw it was Eden. I didn't pick it up. There was no reason to. Everything I needed to do had been done. The message had been clear, and now she could work through whatever it was that had led her to make those choices. I wasn't there to fix it for her. A week later, I got another call. This time, it was Tristan. "Finn, you won't believe this," he said, his voice full of excitement. "Miller? He's on the run. Not even staying in town anymore. Last I heard, he's in a hotel somewhere in Ohio, laying low, trying to avoid the mess." I leaned back in my office chair, smirking. Didn't take long for the house of cards to fall. "You weren't kidding when you said he'd burn himself down, were you?" Tristan said, half laughing. "I'm guessing you're not exactly surprised." "Not in the least," I said, not missing a beat. "Let him keep running. He dug his own hole." I hung up, my attention already back on the crew, but something settled inside me. The satisfaction didn't come in big moments or grand gestures. It came in the quiet certainty that everything had unfolded exactly as it should. Mark's rise had been quick, and so had his fall. It wasn't my job to chase him down or give him a piece of my mind. He had everything to lose, and in the end, he lost it all. The job was finished sooner than expected. The new building was exactly what I'd promised: strong, reliable, and built to last. I stood in the empty lot, the sun setting behind the structure, a slight breeze catching the edges of my jacket. Charles showed up, wiping his hands on his workout gear, grinning. "Not bad for an old guy, huh?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "You know damn well I could have done this with my eyes closed." He slapped me on the back, hard enough to knock the wind out of me. "You could have, but you didn't. You actually finished it." I watched as the crew started packing up for the day, their trucks pulling out, leaving me standing there, looking at what we'd built. People were going to be talking about this project for years, and that was fine by me. It wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about the work itself, either. It was about the fact that it was done. Later that week, Eden called again. This time, I picked up. I didn't have to, but I did. "Finn," she said, her voice quiet. "I just wanted to let you know that I've moved out. Everything's finalized." "Good," I said, not offering anything more. "I'm sorry for how everything went," she added, but I could hear the weight of resignation in her voice. I just thought I could control it all." "You can't control people," I said simply. "You can't control a life that's already set its course." "I know," she whispered. I was wrong. The line went silent, and I didn't push for more. I didn't need to hear it. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. That was enough. A few days later, I was back at the gym, feeling the weight of the dumbbells pressed down in my hands, the sweat sticking to my skin. Charles was spotting me, offering his usual dose of motivational bullshit. "You're stronger than you think," he said, grinning like he'd just dropped some life-changing knowledge on me. Yeah, I muttered, pushing through the set, ignoring the burn. "Don't think I need you to tell me that." He laughed, but he knew I was in a different place now. I wasn't trying to get stronger for anyone but myself. That's what this whole mess had taught me. Later, after the last rep, I was cooling down when I saw Zane walk in. My son had grown up since all this mess started. He wasn't the same kid who used to ask for advice on how to swing a hammer. He had his own direction now, his own plans. He walked up to me, looked me in the eye, and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." I didn't need him to say it, but hearing it from him, from the kid I'd raised, hit harder than I'd expected. I nodded once, letting it sink in, then said, "I've done my best. That's all I can do." The world hadn't stopped turning. Life hadn't been waiting for me to make my move. But in the end, it didn't matter. The past was buried, the future was solid, and what I had in front of me was everything I needed. The crew was back on another project, and my name was solid in town. Business was steady. People respected what I'd done. But more importantly, I respected myself. I wasn't some fool who let life drag him down. I didn't let people walk all over me, and I sure as hell didn't let anyone decide my future for me. I had a solid foundation, a legacy that wasn't going anywhere. And that was all that mattered. The rest? Let it burn. Let them chase after the ghosts of their mistakes. I had everything I needed right here, right now, and I wasn't looking back. That was the real victory.